All right, welcome back to another half episode kind of thing of Who Stayed
Yeah,
Over My podcast,
yeah.
and do kind of a quick take on everybody's favorite topic this week, the Justice League Snyder Cut, the 4 hour behemoth. And those of y'all that have listened to the last episode, our second one, know where we stand. Double D is a big Snyder Cut kind of hater, and I believe that this could save the DC cinematic universe. So now that you've watched Double D, I watched it last Friday, because I'm, actually committed to the podcast and want to make sure, I stay up to date on things.
There was some miscommunication, and I do have a life beyond the podcast. I do apologize that it took me a little bit longer. But finding, like, to do it justice, I want to be clear, too. I wanted to find the 4 hour time block that I could set aside to just enjoy this. And it took me longer than 4 hours. And I'll explain why in a minute.
It is.
Because I was making notes and stuff going through it, and, like, I'll explain in a second why it took me longer than 4 hours. But, I really tried. I apologize.
Nah, it's all good. All right, let's start here. Initial out of the gates, out of 10, what's your rating? And then we'll dive into picking it apart a bit.
I mean, that's tough to put it out of 10 because to me the movie has very distinctly different parts, which I would rate very differently. So let's just say like the first half of the show, maybe, or the first half of the movie, would probably get like a solid 7 or 8 from me. The second half, I really feel the quality drops off, and it's more like a 5 or a 6. Wow. And if I could be so glib as to summarize my overall thoughts on this in one word, it would be disappointment.
Wow. Okay.
But and so let me explain a little bit why I'm disappointed. So my disappointment isn't just in this movie itself, and to a certain extent there is, right? Because I do feel like maybe the Snyder Cut was overhyped. Zack Snyder has some really hardcore fans from some of his other works and stuff like that, and they really were dissatisfied with Justice League as the theatrical release was done for very good reasons, frankly. Now that I've seen the Snyder Cut, I actually understand what they were hoping for and expecting. So I'm disappointed with what we got. Let's start there. I'm disappointed with the theatrical cut, okay? Because the first thing that jumped out to me very clearly was Joss Whedon's changes. I think Abrams did the editing. It didn't make any sense. And so I had to research this. From the theatrical cut to the Snyder Cut, the only thing that they filmed exclusively for the Snyder Cut that wasn't filmed originally was the epilogue scene. And this is where we throw up the spoilers disclaimer. I mean, this is about our reactions on the movie, so it should be out there, but spoilers, we're going to be talking about the movie, whatever. So the epilogue scene with Batman and the Joker was the only thing they filmed fresh for the Snyder Cut. So everything else they had in here was what Joss Whedon had walking into this when he took over. And I'm just so utterly disappointed with what he did to it, because the movie on its own is better by far than what we got for the theatrical release.
That's what I think I'm so blown away with, my initial takeaway. And, yes, I think we have two different opinions with Zack Snyder, and he is one of those kind of directors you kind of I wouldn't say it's this polarizing love and hate, but you definitely can get behind what he's doing, or you kind of like take it or leave it.
He has a style. It works in certain cases. It might not work in other cases, but like you have to kind of appreciate the style.
I'm with you. I was kind of blown away at how much stuff they just cut out. And yes, I kind of had a different take with the early portions, maybe just because the early portions were, it's 4 hour movies. So the backstory getting into Cyborg and Flash was like, okay, yeah, I mean, that's like 2 hour kind of trog, but it all made sense because now you're like, wow, Flash makes a lot more sense where they're coming in here. Cyborg, who is a tough character to explain no matter what, even in the comics and everything else, you understand it completely now. And with his father and that whole segment, beautifully done. And I think my favorite part, though, of this entire movie, aside from just getting away from the Ukrainian family that Whedon decided to add in there for whatever goddamn reason, and just poor humor and the whole just the changing of conversations that Whedon put in there in comparison, that just fragmented it even further. It was just mind-boggling. But the use of combat and how the combat in this movie was subtle storytelling, I think that's my favorite part of this entire movie. And I think what, for me, like, I put this as an 8.5, 9 out of 10. And I say that because if this would have came out in the theaters, and this is what we got out of the gates after Batman versus Superman, even if it was a 2-part film, because it would be a tough sell with a 4 hour movie. If it was 2 parts, and you could definitely sell this as 2 parts, I think I would have been floored and been like, that's exactly what I was expecting. So I have to kind of rate it that high, because it's like, I would have been that pumped seeing it for the first time in the theaters like that. because that's exactly what I wanted to see was this film.
And so I do want to touch on like one of the points you made in terms of like Whedon specifically reshot a bunch of like one-liners and shit like that. Like it wasn't,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it
unnecessarily.
was really just random jokes and shit that was in there, and made for a lot less, I think, emotional impact into the whole thing, because it was meant to be like funny jokes to like punch it up or whatever. Like it really
But just
brought the whole thing down.
it didn't need to, and like there was still a good amount of like humor and slapstick in there. But I think one of my most disappointing scenes that we didn't reshot was when they're talking about reviving Superman and how that was an entire conversation between the team. And
Yeah.
you also had Cyborg and Flash
Talking about
weighing
how he
heavily.
might not be happy coming back, basically.
Yeah, but you also had the two basic scientists, Cyborg and Flash, talking about the actual process. It wasn't just Batman and Wonder Woman making a decision for
when
the
did
team.
Flash get to be a scientist? Pause.
So, well, again, he understands the Speed Force, and he
He
Barry
understands the
Allen is
Speed
a
Force.
forensic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
He's a forensic scientist. That's his profession.
Yeah. In the movie, for the record,
So-
he's not there yet, but he literally
No,
has
but
just got accepted into a program.
It's
So
the,
he's
it's the
not.
two folks though that understand and are the most intelligent in this realm of like how it actually work. But either way, I'm
Sure.
glad that it was an actual team conversation. Even Aquaman though too, like all he knows is basic mythology. He understands the threat, and he's like, "This is a bad idea, guys." But it wasn't just Batman and Wonder Woman. It was much more organic. This is a bunch of strangers coming together, trying to make a big decision, and you saw all POVs involved in that. Plus, the whole foreshadowing with what did Cyborg see in
Yeah.
his vision.
Yeah. So when I said disappointed, I wasn't just disappointed in what we got theatrically. I was also disappointed in the Snyder Cut for various reasons. One of which is what you already touched on in terms of this probably should have just been two movies. The first big fight with Steppenwolf, where they basically get their asses handed to them, the thing floods and stuff, they have to escape, comes right around the 2-hour mark and would have made a very reasonable place to end on, kind of like that high note cliffhanger of like, we had our asses handed to us, this is happening. It would have been a good place to end the movie to set up a second one. And I was looking back at, because I got curious about this, I was looking back at the runtimes of like the Marvel movies, right? And I think we have to make these certain comparisons because the Marvel movies,
They're all like 2.5. Because honestly, I was rewatched Winter Soldier and Civil War this week.
yeah. So the longest one is Endgame, and that cracks the 3-hour mark, right? Most of them run very solidly 2 to 2.5 hours. Endgame beats 3, and this is coming in at 4. And I gotta say, part of what I was disappointed with is I don't think this movie earned a 4-hour runtime, right? Like the build up and payoff in Endgame was significantly larger, and I feel like they were trying to get too much done with this that should have been dealt with either in other movies or in other ways that like
See, this
it's
is
all good
where I
stuff,
think
but it's all
you're still
packed in
thinking
together.
you're still thinking MCU logic with this. And like a big reason too why I rate this as high as I do, this is basically Justice League Origins film. And any Origins film is going to have holes and plot twists, and it's going to be like, yeah, whatever. It's not going to be perfect. But there's a lot of moving parts in this that come in, and the Snyder Cut, we see such a much more of a complete version and development. And even again, the subtle combat storytelling. I mean, we see the Amazons fight Darkseid, and it's actually like, wow, this is what the Amazons and the teamwork. That's one of those badass scenes in the entire movie. And it was like polar opposite of what we didn't put together. It's just like,
Well, yeah,
you
that
are
was
describing
insane.
Amazonian culture, and like these are some of the fiercest warriors, and like look what they're doing fighting Steppenwolf. And then again, too, I did like Darkseid actually coming to Earth rather than Steppenwolf. That whole scene made so much more sense, and kind of has that angst of why Darkseid keeps coming at Earth so many times in the comics. But point aside, with this being basically in Origins, then it's not MCU. Yes, MCU's payoff was different because you had the culmination of almost a decade worth of movies. This was basically their starting point. And when you look at it like that, and with how many storylines this sets up, even not even diving into the nightmare scenario, there's so much they could have done with this movie. And there's so much more they could have done with this going forward. Aquaman's entire movie makes so much more sense after this too.
Oh, I fully agree. I'll say the last thing that majorly disappointed me is the stories that I don't think we're going to get anymore. Because exactly what you're saying, this touched upon Flashpoint, it touched upon Dark Justice, it touched upon I mean, this movie very clearly establishes, and I think Zack Snyder confirmed it in an interview, Lois Lane is pregnant, and he gave us some like look behind what he was planning for the franchise in the long run in terms of he saw Batman dying and Superman's son being named after him as Bruce Kent becoming the next Batman after, Bruce Wayne passes in this DC extended universe. And like, I can't express fully how disappointed I am that we are probably never going to see these storylines pan out, at least not in the way Snyder was imagining them. That's for sure.
No.
But like, maybe even ever, because, and this is what I really want to get your opinion on. I would almost go so far to say as the DCEU is kind of dead in the water, because I think this showed us how much of what they were planning to do, how much of it got changed, and I don't know how they recover from this. Like, there has to be massive shifts in their production and plans going forward, tone, everything. I don't know how you recover from this, to the point that, we scrap the next Ben Affleck movie to the Pattinson Batman we've got coming now, which is not a part of this extended universe that they're building.
Yeah, I don't want to like poo-poo on Whedon too hard on this episode, but I think the biggest black eye, but I think the biggest black eye that this caused for Warner Brothers, and I'm sorry too for the fans that still are gonna hate on it and nitpick because it's rated R and like no kid should be denied Superman. It's like, just shut the fuck up. It's some things they don't have to be for kids, and there's so many mediums out there too. That whole argument is just like, you want to be a hater, just hate better. How about that?
I will say though, in this case, I agree that it shouldn't be R, because I don't think that they took advantage of the R rating, right? Like, to me, it felt like
it was a very soft R.
Yeah, there were a few F-bombs dropped, like one or two, and one of which was included in the epilogue, which was a reshoot.
It wasn't that crazy. And even Steppenwolf, when he tossed the Atlantean and like his head smacks, it's like, there's blood, but like, it shows the power of Steppenwolf, him just tossing someone, and Atlanteans are basically almost gods. So it's just like, it just furthers a little bit of violence to extend the storytelling, but it's not excessive, over the top. And I'm sorry, there's how many mediums that kids can watch with Superman and all these characters.
Mm-hmm.
You're finding a reason just to hate, in my opinion, if you're complaining about the R rating.
I agree. I mean, I really think they should have gone further, because again, like we talked about this before, don't do things like, obviously you're going to be compared to Marvel and stuff like that. Doing things, in this case, the theatrical release tried to become Marvel, be happier and quippier with those one-liners and everything else. Literally, the color palette was entirely different. The way they mastered it in the end and stuff, like, was much brighter in the theatrical release than the Snyder Cut. But also, don't be a devil's advocate, so to speak, or contrarian, just doing the opposite just for the opposite. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we dipped our toes in the R rating kind of deal, soft R. I'm like, look, if you're going to go for it, because I think there's legitimately good stuff you can do. That's not Marvel, you know what I mean?
I don't think it had to be over the top with the violence. I thought what they did was good, and Snyder got a bunch of heat though too with the darker Man of Steel and stuff too. So I think this was a compromise on his end.
This was definitely lighter. I saw
people complain about
work,
Wonder Woman killing the terrorist in the beginning, and it's like, well, like, all right, I'm getting off topic. I'll get to that because
okay,
there's like a couple subtle combat scenes that I thought set this up for so much more, and it is disappointing when I can see it. But the whole black guy with Warner Bros., I think that is the most disheartening part of this. Regardless of where you stand on it, this gave us an actual foundation, between basically 3.5 movies, and we can count this as a two-parter. And with that foundation, yes, there's going to be things you don't like, and I do consider this as an origins film, similar to what Batman vs Superman was basically, 7 films basically trying to get to this point at once. So there are holes and gaps. It's not perfect, but this gave us a clear-cut foundation for this cinematic universe and a lot of different ways to go. And just like the MCU, the first phase movies, not all of them are perfect, but there is a legitimate foundation. But like, there's a legitimate foundation, and you can pivot, and things are going to get better, and the fan base will grow.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody to sit here and ignore that, and then yes, Suicide Squad trailer came out yesterday, and that's exciting. The Starro drop at the end was dope. But I'm going to be mad then if that's what they're going to introduce the Justice League with, since Starro was the original villain for the Justice League.
Yeah.
Because again, it's just like, you guys had a good foundation with multiple story arcs you could pull from, you could really dive in the weeds with, or you could just, let them die on the vine. But it was there. And now we're basically going to start from essentially a commercial POV using Suicide Squad and, going trying out the comedy and James Gunn. Like, I don't know. It's very disheartening because we were left in a good spot after the Snyder Cut. Even if you weren't completely in love with it, at least you can acknowledge that there was enough there to work with and continue to launch.
I agree. Well, and the setup too for the Flashpoint for me was one, better explained and better earned, kind of with Barry's powers. We saw that teasing of like he's got to, he's got to time it right. And in the theatrical release, they drop that thing and, oh, he gets the timing wrong. That's fine. You pick it up, you drop it again, you just repeat and stuff. Instead, what we see in this is this idea of like he knows he's not going to get there on time. He's running late, and so he just runs a little bit faster and does that little rewind. Not that he had to, but it's just one of those things that like you saw that like he was like, I can push a little harder, and so he did. So we tease that rewinding thing, which then becomes obviously the bigger thing at the end of the movie when he goes back and is arguably the hero for all of this in the end, because he Superman lost, right? Compared to the theatrical cut where Superman, like you said, fucks off with the Ukrainian family, like just buggers off and is just like, I'm out, when clearly he could just win because he's that much stronger than Steppenwolf and anything else. He loses because Unity happens, Flash brings it back, and everything that they teased with the Flashpoint and the Nightmare and everything else gives them a very convenient way to reset their extended universe or cinematic universe in the future. They can go through Dark Justice. They can go through other storylines and stuff. And when they feel like that's played to a certain point and they want to sort of inject new life into these characters, now you can step back to the Flashpoint stuff, which you've already established in this movie, this foundational movie, to breathe new life. And now we can get alternate versions of these characters and we can get new storylines. We can get, you know what I mean? And you're not trapped into whatever you've built. Like Marvel, we've talked about a little bit, I think is going to run into that issue as after a certain point of like, now they're getting into this multiverse of madness and da-da-da. Like they've created certain things. They've created walls they have to stay inside to keep the mythology consistent. And DC set themselves up with a very nice get out of jail free card with Flashpoint, which again, like, I don't know if this is going to make it beyond this. And I'm just so sad.
Well, that's the best part, because it does blend Flashpoint and it does blend, it could be an Injustice storyline too, which is cool. But what I loved about this movie though, too, it uses, Snyder is a Superman fan and he doesn't do Batman a disservice, which I think people don't give him enough credit for. Oftentimes, Superman fan, Batman fans, you're in your box and you're not really giving credit to the other one. He uses Batman's arc to really give Superman so much more depth. And I'm a big Superman hater, as you know. And I love what he did with Man of Steel. I love what he does with this, because think like one of the best scenes in this entire movie is when Batman's getting on the jet and he goes to Alfred. He's like, you have to have faith. And it's just like a lot of fans get mad about that, get mad about the cussing, get mad about him using guns. But it's like, again, Batman realized he fucked up the first time. And it's like, hey, I'm doing things wrong. I'm overthinking. Something's missing here. We have a foe that like I can't beat. Something has to give. So he is changing it up, but he does have that nightmare in the back of his mind, like, what am I missing? And yes, that could have been flushed out better and everything else, that little conversation with him and Wonder Woman. But again, it's basically an origins film. It's not perfect. And then with the nightmare scene, it's like, then you realize that one of these pass, he realizes that having that faith, he shot himself in the foot again. So it's like, then you're going to get that hardened Batman. And each time he messes up, we get this sense he loses a part of himself. So you have that paradigm shift of like, he has these threats he knows he can't beat by himself, no matter how smart he is, no matter how calculated he is. And he's trying his best to figure things out. And I think that's one of the coolest parts of this. And it paints the picture of Superman as being as powerful basically as Darkseid. And it's like, if we don't stop him, we don't do certain things, this is the future we're going to have. And again, come back to the combat, that fight scene when he faces the entire Justice League and the headbutt to Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
It's like, again, it's just like he's not holding back anymore. I mean, he is, because he doesn't like, kill anybody in that sense. But it's like, okay, I mean, you're not on my level. And why I hate the Wonder Woman movies, Wonder Woman is as powerful as Superman, if not stronger in some capacity. So it's just like, she is a warrior and she basically kills first. And that's why I love too that terror scene, because it's like, she's an Amazon. Like, she doesn't really care for mankind. If you mess up, she's going to kill you if you're a bad guy. And we kind of have that new frontier storyline with her and Martian Manhunter in there, which I think is phenomenal. And you see a bit more of that. Yeah, these are heroes, but for not goody goody two shoes, she's a warrior first. That's Wonder Woman's whole gig.
Yeah, and it comes back to the things we've talked about in terms of what DC does well with the psychology of their characters, with looking at these sort of like darker, more gritty realism kind of things, and what we think the DC movie should focus on to differentiate from Marvel are these elements basically of these characters and not just being good for goodness sake, so to speak, as and being very like whitewashed and just happy go lucky and whatever. And a lot of that does come through in the Snyder Cut. I agree. I will say I didn't like the scene where Superman resurrects and starts fighting everyone. That was obviously in the theatrical, obviously in the Snyder Cut, mostly because it just seemed out of place. But I cared less about in the Snyder Cut. Let me put it that way. Like, it wasn't as big a deal because it didn't represent as much of a chunk of time kind of deal. And there was like plenty of other storylines and plots going on and stuff that like it didn't bother me nearly so much as it bothered me in the theatrical cut.
The Superman fight, it was shorter than Whedon's, but there also was dialogue changes. Was there not?
Especially with the beginning of it. Yeah, there were some jokes. Again, the Whedon thing with the fucking one-liners and jokes thrown in. When he came out, Flash also made this comment of like, do we show our bellies? Like, do we bow? Like, whatever. When he came out, like some joke about like, how do we show that we're like afraid or respect him or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, it was some more like the fluff that got added in the Whedon or the theatrical cut.
And that's my point too, to where even that standoff in the, yes, it's not quite combat out of the gates, but there's tension in just how they're standing, and you know, it's kind of that facial acting too. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know. I felt the storytelling all across the board in this one was just so much better, and it wasn't force fed.
I do agree.
I don't know. And again, I don't want to like poo poo on Whedon too much. You don't know how much the studio is telling them they wanted to be like Marvel and basically do what he did for the MCU.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, and it's one of those things where it's like, we don't know what those conversations were, but end of the day, the version we got in the movie theater was goddamn awful.
Yeah, it was. And you know, I think part of the issue too was Dawn of Justice was poorly received, especially by critics, but even by fans it didn't do so hot, and it had that darker tone that, and this again, seeing what they had to work with, I don't know how much it was Snyder's original vision or he just sort of took that criticism and took it constructively, brought up everything in like the tone and everything else was a little bit lighter for a Snyder film, and I think it would have worked. I really do think that if this was the theatrical cut that we got, coming back to your point too of like how hyped fans were for everything going into this, I think it's already a solid enough film that throw in just the general fervor and like energy that there was going into the Justice League film, I think it would have been a hit, a smash hit, and I think it would have nicely set up a bunch of the stuff that we're talking about. You know, and it's crazy because didn't they spend like $100 million or some shit on all those Whedon reshoots?
Yeah.
And there's not a single one that I would keep versus what they had from Snyder.
No. And that's, I think, the most mind-boggling part when you do watch this is just how do you cut out so much that, I mean, even just a Steppenwolf on Themyscira versus Darkseid, that is like why it makes so much more sense. Even if you just put that scene and keep that in Whedon's cut, the movie makes so much more sense. And it's kind of crazy because it's like, yeah, now it actually is like, okay, but it's upsetting on two fronts. One, that they did that, and two, again, like I still get mad at how many fans are still just trying to hate on it. But
myself included, I guess.
What particular, well, I mean, yours is kind of warranted in the fact of like, you're just upset that, you know, you've been teased now something you would pay money and continue to see.
Yeah.
And, you know,
in large part, my
you also don't want to
disappointment
lose an argument either.
It's fair enough. But like in large part, my disappointment is what we got in theaters and what I'm afraid we're no longer going to get because of the shift. Because I agree with you too. There must have been backroom conversations, behind the scenes conversations about what they were doing, tone of the movie, you know, Marvel-esque-ness of it and stuff like that, that like comes back to the larger picture of where do they see themselves going with this extended universe and the movies. And I'm at this point, I'm convinced because of how big these differences were between the two and the fact they were willing to invest so much money into the reshoots, that the execs now have a different vision than what we saw in the Snyder Cut. And I'm just sad we're not going to see that.
What was your favorite parts, or if there was significantly bad parts in your mind?
My overall favorite change was the complete revamp of Cyborg's character. The theatrical cut,
he looked better too.
He looked better.
And Steppenwolf too.
Well, yeah. Visually, I liked the movie better just in general. I didn't like the kind of like bright color poppiness and everything else with the theatrical cut. But in a lot of ways, I feel like this movie, as much as it is like an origin movie of like the Justice League, is also our introduction to Flash and Cyborg in the cinematic universe, and Flash kept, I think, a similar-ish role in the theatrical cut and still being sort of the wit, the funny guy a little bit, not as pointlessly funny, you know what I mean? Like, he was able to get serious and stuff, and you could see that he was nervous with things in the Snyder Cut and like scared that he wouldn't be able to live up to expectations and stuff like that. Like, I think his character was much better developed, but Cyborg wasn't a thing in the theatrical cut, like, at all. Like, he was so barely there and just creepily stalking people and like, you know, looking at them walking in parks and, you know what I mean? It just didn't make sense kind of how he got to where he did and everything else, and then to play such a critical role with stopping everything at the end and like pulling apart the cubes there with Superman. And it just, that has to be my favorite change by far, because at the end of the day, to me, this almost becomes a story less about the Justice League and more about Flash and Cyborg. And I think it humanizes it a lot, as these both having issues with their fathers and their families and how they cope with those issues differently, how they come to terms with those things through, you know, their powers and abilities and stuff and everything else. And it grounds the story in a way that I think the theatrical edition didn't have. So by far, Cyborg and Flash.
No, that's great points on that both. I mean, also too, I mean, Cyborg doesn't have chicken legs like he did in the theatrical version. So that's refreshing. But no, you think about both their powers, and again, how this movie created the foundation it did. Cyborg and Flash both are dealing with time travel and multiple universes. They are the catalyst to both of those points, and how you can go different dimensions and how you can bring in, you know, Darkseid and the New Gods and everything else. Very complicated no matter what. So it's like, you're going to need to take time to flush that stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's a longer movie, but the payoff in flushing that out, even though it's not quite perfect, so much better. But there's two things I also enjoyed aside from the deeper dive. And also, I mean, Urza Miller's Flash, I still think is a bit more Wally West than Barry Allen, but this felt more Barry Allen than the theatrical version. The other one was like,
agreed.
You know, that was
Definitely
basically
agree.
Wally West. Again, with the action via storytelling or storytelling via action. The Superman when he fights Steppenwolf and just the pounding when he's just beating the shit out of him.
Yeah, and the shockwaves going out.
Exactly, yeah. And one, to call back to the beginning of the movie, which I think everyone will agree, the beginning of the movie, 100 times better.
Mm-hmm.
It actually makes sense. But you see him losing his grip, and then he's just brutalizing Steppenwolf. You know what I mean? Like, Superman would have never done that. And you're seeing again, too, it's just like, yes, it's subtle. He has no filter now. So that turn then, and we already are the foreshadow with Lois and everything else. So it's just like, it makes so much more sense going forward. And to me, that was one of the coolest things in the entire movie, because it's like, you're seeing him break. You're seeing Wonder Woman then too, like, question, like, did I leave the Amazons? Like, she doesn't know they're okay. But she's also, again, already killed somebody in the beginning of the movie. Like, she doesn't even want to help humankind. You know what I mean? So you see that division, and it comes back that new frontier kind of, again, if humans are going to be savages, they're not worth saving. And we know her and Aquaman both died too with the nightmare scenario. So it's like, what fraction happens? And also too, those are the only two that can really take Superman one-on-one for an extended period of time. So if there is a fraction in the Justice League and those two are both gone, that probably is exactly why they're in the nightmare scenario they are. So again, all of that is set up, you know, murky and whatnot, but I thought that was just beautifully done with just the subtleness. But the parademons, I fucking love how they did the parademons.
Oh, no longer smelling fear, but just like you've been exposed to mother cubes and stuff like that.
So, well, not only that, but like the one that like shot the Flash, you know what I mean? And like, it's like, yeah, it's stupid, but like, parademons aren't regular henchmen. Like, one of them is a problem, you know what I mean? And like, one of them is a problem for any member of the Justice League. They will kill you if they don't stop. They have a swarm mentality. I felt in the theatrical version, they were basically treated like henchmen, to where like, there's no challenge. And this one, it was like, no, they're a fucking problem. Like, you can't sleep on parademons. They will end you. We've seen many a times, Justice League Dark, parademons legitimately destroy the Justice League. You know what I mean? So it's just like, they are vicious. And I thought that was, again, just so perfect of the threat they're dealing with. You can't sleep on them. I mean, those two factors alone, I thought were just great. I'm naturally, I love the entire movie, but I'm not sure I'm going to watch. I'm not sure if I'm going to watch it in grayscale, the Mank version of Justice League.
Jesus Christ. What would you consider, if anything, bad about the Snyder Cut? For all the stuff you'd like about it, is there stuff that you didn't like?
I mean, the length is tough, but again, could this have been 2-part movie? Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's a tough in one sitting, but it's a good time for it. I kind of dislike Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor a bit more in this. Yeah. She just doesn't, like, the bald look just doesn't work with him. I'd be straight up. I don't mind his mannerisms and stuff, but it's I don't know, he's a bit tougher sell in this one as Lex Luthor. There's not too much I didn't like. Like I'm not trying to like nitpick or anything else too much because even the parts I didn't like per se, they still played a role. Like
Yeah.
Martian Manhunter, take it or leave it, but it was cool that he was watching. And again, like I'm such a fan of the New Frontier on Bruce Timm did with that entire storyline. It's I like that he has been there. We don't know how long he's been there, but he has been watching. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, my thing with Manhunter personally, I think he should have just been full cut from the movie because it was weird to me that he was Martha Kent in the conversation with Lois because that conversation, again, Joss did a complete reshoot of that where they were sitting in the office and they talking about this and there's like some latent sexism stuff going on of like, oh, it's a her and whatever that whole weird thing was. The Snyder Cut version of that conversation was much more grounded, much more, again, like exploring these human emotions and stuff like that. I felt it carried more gravity. And then you find out that the conversation wasn't actually with Martha Kent, it was with Martian Manhunter. And I don't think that was a necessary twist. I don't know that it really added anything because I felt the scene stood on its own as a conversation between Lois and Martha.
Yeah.
And then having him come back at the end, like again, like you can still do that. Like if you want to get into like the post credits or whatever kind of things, like that's very a Marvel thing. So I don't think I would recommend it for a DC movie. But like it had that feel of it of like, hey, here's Martian Manhunter kind of deal of like here's a teaser of like future things to come. That I could have still dealt with, you know what I mean? But on the whole, if you wanted to get rid of that storyline, I would have been okay with it. I think if I had to pick another change that I really liked, actually, the storytelling and the focus on Cyborg and Flash and the way they're presented was a great change. The second one is the relative power level. I've kind of made this point, maybe, I don't know if I did it in this podcast or not, but I despise Captain Marvel in the cinematic universe, in the MCU cinematic universe, because she's just so much stronger than everything else. Like there's nothing that would present a challenge to her that would have been a challenge that would not have absolutely decimated the existing Avengers, right? So her existence alone completely changes the power balance of that universe and will affect future movies. In the same fashion that the theatrical release made Superman so insanely more powerful than all the other members that like they just didn't hold a candle, they didn't compare. Where we see that he's physically maybe the strongest, but we also see that they all have unique areas where they excel. Batman's cunning and so to speak, his leadership in this actually comes through, I think, in a lot of ways, and putting together the team and everything else. Barry, because we just talked about that, but Barry, the being able to go back in time and stuff, like maybe he doesn't punch as hard, but the time thing came into play twice, you know, in a big way, and probably in future movies. Cyborg, they make the point through his father's monologue about like how he can basically control the earth because he can control technology now. Again, like it's a different type of power than just like I can hit things hard. That you get this sense that all these people who are members of the Justice League at this sort of baby league that's forming and stuff are legitimately strong people. They are all legitimately very strong heroes. And you know, that then I think gives more appreciation to Steppenwolf and his character and stuff and how much trouble they had with him in the Parademons, because you realize that these people aren't jokes. You know what I mean? Where the theatrical version with Superman being so strong, well, yeah, so they couldn't handle Steppenwolf and the Parademons because, you know, like the alien Superman is the one who's got all the power, and they're not aliens; they're all humans. Well, so they're just
I think,
inferior.
and again, that's why I think it's a bit comical with some of the hate the movie gets in the Snyder's movies. It's not so much on Snyder on this one because the music, some of his musical choices, take it or leave it. I think he sometimes moves too slow, but. I love the White Stripes, but I've never been so happy not to hear them in this movie. The icky thump scene with Aquaman and just changing the music with that was so much better. And like I kept cracking up because I was waiting to see the jump back. You did.
Oh my god! I'm so glad they got rid of that exit. That fall back into the water
like,
stuff. I'm so glad he just disappeared, man. Thank God for that. And I couldn't believe they kept the Tiger Roar bomb. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, and I started cracking up when I heard it. And I think it's just how I think it gets the hard cut. And I think just with the audio sound, I think if they would let that play for an extra half second,
maybe I don't know. There's some weird audio work on it. To me, it just sounded funny.
I think it's a harsh cut, but I can see where you think it sounds like a lion roar.
I don't know what it is. It really just sounds odd to me, but I don't know. So how do you want to kind of boil this down? Maybe overall, let's bring this back maybe to the original question that we kind of posed.
Just concede to the fact that you were wrong.
Look. I will concede the Snyder Cut was way better than I was expecting. I will concede that this should have absolutely been the theatrical release. 4-hour runtime notwithstanding, this is the version of the film that we should have gotten in theaters. But let's bring this back to the original question, which I'm not quite sure I'm willing to concede is, do you think this is going to inject new life into the extended universe? Because I kind of feel this still leaves them in a bad, maybe even worse place, because now we get a better sense of like what changes they're making maybe with their vision. And I don't like it. I don't like what I think they're going for now going forward.
I do think it has been a win. Maybe not new life, but new interest. I mean, a million people retweeting "Restore the Snyderverse" on Twitter. But still, a million fans that are behind it. I mean, even yourself, you weren't really optimistic about this movie, and now you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
you got me on the hook. I'd like to see a little bit more of this.
Yeah.
That's something they should take in, I think, significant consideration. Will we see anything come out of it? I don't know. What I do worry about now, though, with the DC universe and fandom, I guess it puts more pressure on the Suicide Squad movie. And is that going to be a new starting point? And are they going to use any of the storylines?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, even if it was just another 2 movies with the nightmare scenario playing out, I would love to see that, because I know a lot of folks didn't like that, and they can love and hate Leto's Joker. I thought that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in superhero movies, period. That whole dialogue and the tension between him and Batman in that scene.
I hated the epilogue. I'll be honest. If I had to pick something I hated, now that you mention it, the epilogue entirely, I would have just dropped. I thought where they ended part 6 was a great ending all on its own.
I mean, I agree. I don't think it was necessary, but I enjoyed that it was there. I think there was, kind of an after credits scene more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that felt more like Snyder wanting to pet project, or, you know what I mean? Like something that he just personally wanted to do, because he made a comment, I think, in one of his interviews in terms of they never brought together Affleck's Batman and Leto's Joker in any movie. Like, they've all done solo movies. They've done several movies. And it's just like, he's like, it's weird that they've never directly crossed paths before. And he wanted to give fans that exchange between these 2 versions of the characters. So in some ways I felt like that bothered me, because it felt very self-aggrandizing of like, hey, this really doesn't have anything to do with the movie that much per se. It's mostly we just want to get the interaction between these 2 characters. And that was the only thing that they reshot for the Snyder Cut, was the Leto Joker, the nightmare scenes with set in the apocalypse world and stuff. That was it. Leto Joker and Batman there going on. So I don't know. It felt very much out of place to me.
I mean, kind of a closing point then. What do you think the next move for Warner Brothers should be at this stage?
Should be, if I had my druthers, right? Like if I could speak to the execs and be like, hey, here's what I think you should do. Basically what I would say is do a soft reboot. I think you've got enough stuff at play with Flashpoint and everything else that you can sort of give yourselves a little bit of a do-over on your cinematic universe. Pull that out. It's a bit of a shame of a way to do it, but the only other option I think is to wait too long to really reboot everything. I don't think that's a good idea. So move towards a Flashpoint movie. It'll still take you a couple of years to get there probably. Do the Flashpoint, give it that kind of soft reset reboot, and this time clarify the vision, man. Like, sit down, figure it out, have those overarching people that are going to be looking at everything and continuities and getting it all in, and please, please, please buy into the world that I think Snyder's presented in this movie. Like, even more than Dawn of Justice, the version of DC that he presented in Justice League in the Snyder Cut is the version I would love to see on the silver screen, and go with that. Commit to that, do that. I think it would be amazing. You can drop the 2 or 3 F-bombs and the slight extra violence if you're really worried about those R movies. Like, it really wouldn't be a huge change, but it would still be fairly true to the comics, and a very marked difference, I think, from the Marvel stuff, and be overall just a great experience.
No, I'm with you. I'm with it. And I'm glad you finally come to the dark side and admit that the Snyderverse was worthwhile. So,
all right. So we're 1-on-1 for debates, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, foreshadowing there. Okay, yeah. No, but that's episode 2.5 coming to a close with Double D admitting that he was wrong.
Oh, God. It's a hard pill to swallow.
But no, guys, as always, thank you guys for listening. We have quite a bit coming up as far as next episodes. You guys will have the Mass Effect episode, which it's a long one, but I think it's one of my favorites we've recorded so far, straight up. I re-listened to that. I had a blast with it. That'll be out. We are going to try to do bi-weekly kind of drops, and then, with pop culture kind of trending stuff like Snyder Cut, I think we can do these kind of quick kind of hits for y'all. But that'll be out in the next, and then we'll have the MMO versus RPG argument with the RPG camp, MMO camp, and then we'll also have Brian Salerno, comic book shop owner from Newport News, after that. Basically talking about a little bit everything we've discussed already on the show with the MCU, DC films, Disney Plus, and again, the kind of the culture of how much has that impacted comic book sales at, you know, his shop, at industry. And also, I mean, comic books in general with coronavirus, it's one of the few kind of success stories too. I mean, they almost done the water this time last year, and they've bounced significantly. And Marvel actually too is with a different distributor outside of Diamond now, which is pretty big
Oh, I didn't know
news.
that.
Yeah, Penguin signed off for Marvel's distribution, which is a pretty big move. So I'm kind of curious to hear Brian's take on that, and because Diamond essentially had a monopoly on distribution, everything went through Diamond. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So a little bit different than our regular conversations, but I think it'll be good to have a third party in here too. So,
Yeah, let us know how much we get wrong.
but no, guys, as always, thank you for listening. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, a YouTube page, saved over underscore pod. And thank you guys.